Town of Cary's Government Access Channel.
Good evening and welcome to the Town of Cary Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight. I now call this meeting to order. All board members, staff, and applicants are participating in Cary's council chambers. Our board clerk, Julie Mitchell, will now take roll call for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Crutchfield. The following board members are not able to join us this evening. Jessica McClure will not be here tonight. For the record, I will verbally state the following board members as present: Sean McAndrew, Chris Johnson, Mike Roselli, John Sorrell, Stephen Crutchfield, Don Hamilton, Mary Jo Hill, Andy Coe, and Jeff Moncrief.
Thank you. The Cary Community Plan will continue to be the guiding document for this board. Our role is to function as citizen advisors to the town council, who will make the final decision on all rezoning activity. Citizen opinions based on the Cary Community Plan document are very important in our role in advising the town council. While this is a public meeting, it is not a public hearing. There is no opportunity for the public to speak during this meeting. If you have comments about any of these cases, we encourage you to reach out to the staff, case manager, or the applicant by email or phone. You may reach out to our board members through email. You may also contact the council directly through email or during the public speaks out portion of any regularly scheduled town council meetings. These meetings may be streamed live on the Town of Cary website and will be posted to YouTube within a few days following this meeting. All past planning and zoning board meetings are available to view on YouTube. The first item is approving tonight's agenda. Would someone please make a motion to approve our agenda for the evening?
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Would someone second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. None opposed. Next item is the approval of the October 24th meeting minutes. If anyone has any changes to make, we can do so at this time. If not, would someone make a motion to approve the October 24th meeting minutes?
I so move.
Would someone second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. None opposed. Our first case on the agenda for tonight is 21 REZ 16, Old Apex Road rezoning. Aaron Puckett, Senior Planner, will share the staff's presentation. Following the presentation, the applicant will share their remarks. All board members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff and the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, board. This is a request to rezone approximately 21 acres located on Old Apex Road, about 550 feet south of its intersection with West Chatham Street. The subject property is an assemblage of 4 parcels with frontage on Old Apex Road. The CSX Railroad is located about 200 feet to the east, and the Triangle Forest subdivision is adjacent to the west. Portions of the Oxford Hunt Planned Development District, or PDD, are located to the north, and the Garden Supply Company is located across Old Apex Road to the south. A portion of the Oxford Hunt PDD to the north of the subject rezoning is already zoned for a variety of residential options, including multifamily, and that's seen here in the dark red color. The applicant intends to utilize this parcel for a portion of the development, in part because access on a second public street will be required for the number of units proposed. This parcel is not included in the rezoning request tonight, since it has an existing zoning entitlement for the proposed use. According to Cary's GIS, there are stream buffers that impact portions of the site, but field determination of those features are required at time of development plan review. Old Apex Road is identified as a 5-lane thoroughfare on the future roadway widths map, and currently it varies from 2 to 3 lanes along this site's frontage. The Go Cary Apex Cary Express route runs along Old Apex Road, but does not have a stop in the vicinity of the subject site. However, Cary Transit staff is evaluating the feasibility of adding local service to this corridor as part of the Wake Bus Plan update for fiscal years 2024 to 2030. Per the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan, there is a planned greenway trail along the western boundary of the subject site. The current zoning of the assemblage is residential 40, and the applicant wishes to rezone the property to residential multifamily conditional use. The applicant has offered conditions, including limiting the use to 255 multifamily dwellings and associated accessory uses, providing a 50-foot wide Type A buffer along the western property line, which is 10 feet wider than the LDO requirement, constructing the greenway shown on this site in the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan, along with a pedestrian crossing across Old Apex Road to include a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or RRFB, as long as it is warranted and approved by NCDOT. Providing a 15% increase to the amount of open space required by the LDO, a condition added since the public hearing, and you'll see those changes in green on these next few slides. And that open space may include the community gathering space, which will be a minimum of 6,250 square feet, 25% above that required by the LDO, and 2,000 square feet of additional landscaped area in the vicinity of the greenway easement, which will be landscaped with trees and shrubs. The applicant has also committed to providing at least 10 electric vehicle charging stations, which has been increased since the public hearing. The applicant has also offered some of the traffic improvements recommended by the traffic study, including extending the northbound and eastbound left turn lanes at the Old Apex and Cary Parkway intersection, which is located to the southwest, as well as improvements at each of the site access points. The applicant's traffic engineer submitted justification for the improvements not being offered, which is attached to your staff report as a separate memo. Note that site drive number 3, which is shown in the northernmost circle on this slide, is outside of the area proposed for rezoning. This is because, as previously mentioned, the development would need to include the parcel to the north to meet Cary requirements for access on a second public street for 100 or more dwelling units. And that access point was also an assumption of the traffic study. Since the council public hearing, the applicant has offered some additional conditions, which include wiring at least 50% of garages for future EV charging capabilities, installing solar conduit in at least 50% of the buildings, providing a 100-foot setback from the western property line in which no structures would be built, committing to several building limitations within 200 feet of that western property line, such as a maximum of 2 stories, a maximum of 30 units within that area, and a commitment to garages for all units within that area. They've also limited all buildings on the site to a maximum of 22 units each, provided a number of architectural requirements, including 50% masonry in all street-facing building facades, and that's an increase to the 35% required by the Community Appearance Manual. Ensuring street-facing garages will not project more than a foot beyond front facades of buildings, providing a minimum 5 to 12 roof pitch, and breaking up roof lines horizontally and or vertically, providing at least 1 window on the side facade of each end unit, and providing attached garages for at least half of all units. And finally, they've also provided a public art installation on the site, which will be visible from Old Apex Road. An analysis of the request against the Imagine Cary Community Plan finds that policies from a number of chapters apply. The proposed use of multifamily residential would provide more housing choices on one of the few remaining R40 zoned assemblages in this area. Of existing housing in a 1-mile radius of the site, only about 14% of units are currently multifamily. The LIVE chapter also can support residential uses on infill sites when those uses are designed to be context sensitive, which can be addressed by housing type, building massing, setbacks, density, buffers, or other strategies. While the density is significantly higher than that of the Triangle Forest neighborhood to the west, conditions to provide a slightly increased buffer and a 100-foot building setback from the western property line, in addition to architectural requirements and limitations on the number of units per building, may help meet this policy. We do note that the 2-story limitation for buildings within 200 feet of the shared boundary with Triangle Forest does not necessarily limit the overall height in feet, which would default to the maximum allowed by the RMF zoning district. The provision of apartments supports the work policy to provide diverse housing options to support Cary's current and future workforce. The commitment to construct the Greenway segment along the western property line of the subject site exceeds the LDO requirement to dedicate an easement for Cary to construct the trail in the future, thereby helping meet policies of the Engage chapter. And similarly, the construction of the off-street Greenway and commitment to an RRFB pedestrian signal help address the MOVE policy regarding safety for all modes. The SHAPE chapter speaks to providing transitions between land uses by separating them, such as with increased buffers, or connecting them using form or use transitions. The applicant has not committed to any limits beyond the LDO regarding height or density, but since the public hearing has offered the previously mentioned massing and architectural conditions, as well as an additional separation from the western property line. The applicant has offered a somewhat wider perimeter buffer along the western property line where adjacent to the lower density detached dwellings, the provision of a public art piece and certain architectural considerations, including the provision of garages, which could help limit surface parking, speak to the aesthetic policy of the SHAPE chapter. The future growth framework designation of heritage neighborhood also supports the largest diversity of housing types and supports multifamily uses in those areas. Finally, the aforementioned buffer and increased open space, along with a commitment to at least 10 EV charging stations and pre-wiring for some units, does at least partially address some of the SERVE chapter policies regarding sustainable energy, open space, and tree preservation. We do note that the provision of solar conduit alone does not necessarily guarantee future solar installation and therefore does not appear to directly address SERVE policies. A virtual neighborhood meeting was held in January and over 80 members of the public attended. Questions and comments included concerns regarding stormwater drainage, buffers and tree preservation, impacts to wildlife habitat, crime rates, the density, height, and residential use of the development and how it would fit in with existing neighborhoods, the potential for units to be rented rather than owned, parking rates, and traffic impacts. Staff received emails and 311 inquiries from 19 citizens after the neighborhood meeting, and staff also met in person with a group of 3 neighbors from Triangle Forest. Some citizens expressed similar concerns as the comments received at the neighborhood meeting, especially regarding the proposed use and density and environmental considerations. Some questioned whether the heritage neighborhood designation was appropriate for this area and suggested Cary might consider a plan amendment. Some just wanted general clarity on the plan and how it is applied to rezoning requests, and others were seeking information about the case. We also received emails from 9 citizens in advance of tonight's meeting, some of which were simply seeking information about the case, and others who reiterated concerns regarding traffic, transitions, project density, light impacts, drainage, and the lack of affordable housing. A number of citizens stated a desire to have the site remain undeveloped. A public hearing was held in July. There were 36 written comments, 1 call-in speaker, and 9 in-person speakers. And again, concerns included primarily those with the proposed use and density, environmental and drainage impacts, transitions to adjoining neighborhoods, and traffic concerns. Council commented that the use and density could make an abrupt transition, which may not be fully mitigated by the 50-foot buffer alone. They encouraged consideration of lower density townhouses on the western portion of the site. They did also note the need for more housing in Cary generally. Some members also encouraged the applicant to consider environmental and affordability conditions. The applicant since the public hearing, as discussed earlier, including an increase in the number of communal EV charging stations from 6 to 10 and EV-ready wiring in 50% of garages. They have offered an increase of 15% to LDO required open space. They offered a 100-foot setback from the western property line, as well as additional building massing restrictions within 200 feet of the property line. They also offered some architectural considerations, such as increased masonry, garages for at least 50% of units, pitched roofs, and a limitation of 22 units per building. A public art feature has also been offered for the site, and solar conduit is proposed in at least 50% of buildings. Staff's preliminary recommendation is for consistency with the plan. We found that the request provides for more housing choice in the area, which can support both live and work policies. The commitment to construct the greenway segment proposed for the site and provide an RRFB or similar pedestrian treatment, if approved by NCDOT, addresses engage and move policies regarding the provision of greenway connections and safety for all modes of travel. While density and height are proposed to remain as permitted by the LDO, an increased western perimeter buffer, 100-foot setback, and additional massing limitations within the next 100 feet may help with the context-sensitive transitions, which are recommended by policies of both the LIVE and SHAPE chapters. The Future Growth Framework designation of heritage neighborhoods supports the greatest variety of housing types, which can include multifamily uses. SERV policies are also addressed with an increase to required open space and buffers, as well as the provision of some EV charging. Solar conduit provision does not substantively contribute to the sustainable energy SERV policy. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative, Avi Gruel, is here to speak to the request, and following his comments, I'm available for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Avi Graywall with Singh Development, the applicant, 2601 Weston Parkway, Cary, North Carolina. I believe Aaron's done a great job of highlighting the case and the major points of it to date, so I'm going to keep my comments brief. We've been working on this case for well over a year now, and it's involved several meetings with not only staff but neighboring residents. Since the public hearing back in the summer, we've added several conditions since, like Aaron noted, those that pertain to the entire site essentially architecturally commit us to a development similar to a project we're just finishing up at the intersection of Cary Parkway and Evans called Griffin Weston. Beyond that, and at the suggestion of council back in the summer, we've focused a lot on the transition between this development and the neighboring R12 subdivision to the west, Triangle Forest, and the conditions that we put in there, as Aaron noted, 100-foot additional building setback and conditions within the 200-foot of the property line essentially limit the density within that within that part of the property to 5.66 units per acre. And I think that's a pretty sizable different transition between what we're proposing on the rest of the site and Triangle Forest. And beyond that, I think it's also worth noting that, Aaron mentioned that to the north, we have, a multifamily condo development, Foxdale Run. We met with them as well. And you have non-residential commercial uses to the north. But at the intersection of Old Apex Road and Chatham, you have more commercial development, a gas station, a senior housing community, and an existing multifamily community at approximately 16 units per acre. And so with that, I think, we believe that this proposed development provides an appropriate transition and appropriate development in this heritage neighborhood, just like Aaron mentioned, that's consistent with the Cary Community Plan. With that, I'm here tonight to answer your questions, as well as our land use attorney, Jamie Schwedler, and traffic consultant, Kevin Dean. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Now is the time for board members to ask any questions of the staff or the applicant. And we will start down with you, Jeff.
All right, thank you. I'm just curious a little bit, maybe for some detail about the Greenway and the connectivity and the timing and, building. I don't know if it's going to the bond part. Just maybe give us a little bit more, whether it's from you or the applicant, about the Greenway and connectivity.
Sure. Let me pull that slide back up too for some context. So you can sort of see here in the northernmost portion of this plan, or excuse me, of this map, there's a future Greenway connection to the north as well as a future street side trail. This would just be one segment that would sort of end up waiting on future development to complete the network.
Right. So that's really my question, is the timing. So what will be done as a result is, obviously other development has to happen. Is some of this going to be built in the near term and then just waiting for the subsequent pieces to be developed? That's what I was trying to understand.
Right, so the only thing we would really have any assurance of timing with would be the piece on this site. Because
Right.
of the zoning condition, they would be required to construct it with construction of the site. I don't believe we have timing on the piece to the north or the south, and I'm going to look at our transportation colleague in the audience. I'm getting a head shake, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we.
That's fine. I
don't
was just
have
trying to
this
get
funding
clarity
yet.
around that. And then with regard to the road and the changes which have been agreed to, Cary Parkway and otherwise, that street's pretty narrow. Or if you've got all these folks and they may want to be migrating from place to place, sidewalks, I don't remember if I saw anything about that when I read through the, through the information provided.
That's a great question. So along the Old Apex Road frontage itself, there would be a required sidewalk as part of the road improvements. So concurrent with development, they would be giving the right-of-way for their half of that
Right.
ultimate right-of-way, along with any associated improvements, which would in this case include the sidewalk. So at least there would sort of be that additional connection, as there is additional sidewalk to the north. So even though we wouldn't be getting the full Greenway connection, to your point, it would be tying in with a sidewalk.
Okay, thank you. The last question, and this is as a kind of a newer member to the team, 6,200 square feet of public space, I think was mentioned. I'm just looking for a little background around, 255 units. Like, how do we decide 6,200 feet is the appropriate number there?
So that is in excess of the LDO requirement for a site of this size, which requires 5,000 square feet of community gathering space, so they are proposing to exceed it.
Gotcha.
And then that could be within, but in addition to that, there's also a requirement for open space on the site. That can include buffers, stream buffers, any kind of vegetated area. The gathering space can be included in that. So there's sort of two different requirements.
Okay,
Working to the same end, and they have offered to exceed both of those.
terrific. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
I just had a question, I guess, two questions. One regarding the pond that's on the property. What's happening with that?
I'm actually going to look to the applicant if they could give an update on the status of that.
Prior to our involvement with the property, that the current property owner, had worked with DEQ for a justification letter that has deemed it not a jurisdictional pond or stream. And then beyond that, we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers, who's determined that it's not a jurisdictional pond as well.
What does that mean? Not a jurisdictional pond?
So it's not, it's not required to have any buffer, and our current plan is to drain the pond and fill it.
Okay. What would you be filling it with? You just make it disappear, basically?
Yeah, essentially, that's our current plan, yes.
Okay. I guess, is there no environmental impact there, or has there been any?
Yeah, so, I mean, the property owner had previously worked with the state DEQ, and then we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers that also has jurisdiction over that, any sort of, I'm a little speaking out of my knowledge, you know, our engineers aren't here to answer that question, but, you know, basically, the Army Corps of an Engineer oversees, and we need their approval to be able to drain any kind of blue line that shows up on GIS. And so we've, at least preliminarily, have determined that it's not jurisdictional, so we can drain and fill it in
Okay.
in accordance with
And I
regulations.
take it the staff is in support of that, because I know there's been some concern in that regard.
Sorry. Didn't mean to sneak up on you. Yes, so we did speak with our stormwater staff about that. Their initial sort of take on that feature is that it's likely not a natural feature because it doesn't appear to be fed by a stream. And their interpretation also aligns with what Mr. Grewal was stating, is that that pond is under the state's jurisdiction. So they would have to go through all those state approvals to get permission for drainage, but Cary would not necessarily have a say in whether the pond could be drained or not. That's going to be a state matter.
Okay. But obviously, they'd still have to go through the process.
Yes.
Okay. And then the only other question, really, I guess, is just in regards to, it seems like there was a lot of feedback, like much more than is normal. And I know you had the meeting in July, I guess?
Yes.
And once everyone makes those comments, what kind of interaction kind of happens with the feedback that you receive, I guess, once you get those feedback? Because it seemed like there was maybe one in support, but most everybody was not in support.
Yes, the bulk of the feedback was in opposition to the case. Our council does encourage citizens to, after that public hearing, continue to work with the applicant if there are still things that they're not satisfied with the case, which is probably why you're seeing some of those additional conditions. I think some of that came from council feedback, some came from citizen feedback. My understanding is also that the applicant has had several additional voluntary meetings with the citizens, but they could speak further to that if you'd like them to.
Yeah, I would, because, you know, we all received multiple emails from folks, and
Yes.
at least it was their impression that there was not that engagement, so that would be helpful if we could learn a little bit more in that regard.
Yeah, certainly. So since the public hearing, we've met with Triangle Forest neighborhood representatives from Triangle Forest 4 times. And, you know, really just to kind of be open and forthcoming with them. We've shared with them our concept plans and how our conditions kind of apply to that concept plan to date. And, you know, a lot of their concerns have been related to density. Some of the specific concerns, have, you know, especially early on, were that, you know, the transition is just not an appropriate use in this location. So, you know, our attempts of creating that transition within the site is what we've tried to highlight to them, but I think there are still concerns with, you know, I think they're looking for an increased buffer on the western property line, a further increased buffer and some sort of reduction in density. And so we'll continue to meet with them, and the conversations have generally been pleasant with the Triangle Forest folks. But to date, I don't think that, you know, based on some of the emails that you've had, that, you know, they're still having some challenges. We're still having some challenges with trying to get them.
Yeah, because I obviously saw, I don't have the slide up in front of me, I saw there were additional accommodations that were made since that July meeting, but the solar panels and electric vehicle charging, I don't remember
That's,
seeing
yeah,
those
they
as
haven't
like
really.
concerns, so although there are changes, but it didn't seem to address some of the specific concerns.
Specific to Triangle Forest has been everything we've done within the western property line, so the 100-foot building setback and all the conditions that kind of limit density and height, or limit it to 2 stories, and, you know, having buildings that are more kind of residential in nature on that side of the property, which is something that was discussed at council.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. No further questions. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I know that there's a stretch in that eastern portion of the property line where Old Apex narrows to 2 lanes and then goes wide again. Is part of that anticipated to be developed in terms of making it all 3 lanes through there?
So along the property frontage, it would have to be consistent with that planned roadway widths map, which calls for a 5-lane cross-section there. So they would be giving the additional right-of-way for their half of that 5-lane cross-section along the entire frontage.
I'm not sure I understand.
Would they also be building that frontage or just the right-of-way?
They will be building the road improvements along the frontage, yes.
Okay.
So there will still be sections on either end of this site's frontage where then it may not line up until we get the next development and the next development.
I see. And then could you clarify again the situation at the north where you're saying us to another public road in order to be able to generate these or develop this property at that size?
Yes, so I think this map gives the best picture of it. If you
Yes.
see sort of the trapezoid property that's highlighted in red, that property actually already has zoning entitlement for multifamily uses. It's part of the Oxford Hunt PDD that's north of this site. They need to include that property in this development in order to have the access point on Chatham Street. They need that access point both because it was an assumption of the traffic study, so all of their traffic counts are based on them having an access point to the north there, but also because any development in Cary, once you exceed 100 residential units, you have to have access on 2 public streets, so they would need at least one on Old Apex as well as one on Chatham.
So the fact that they don't own that piece of property does not interfere with them being able to have access to Chatham Street?
That would be a private matter for them to work out with the current property owner. Presumably, they would need to acquire it before they'd be able to build this out to its maximum density.
Okay. And then could you also explain the idea of the massing that you talked about? Is it 200-foot buffer that
Yes, so
addresses that?
within that, right now, the way that they're sort of transitioning from that western property line, you have the 50-foot type A planted buffer or vegetated buffer, presumably
Right.
there will be existing vegetation there. There's a 100-foot setback, so essentially adding 50 feet to that, in which no structures can be built. And then an additional 100 feet, and within that next 100 feet, they've committed to limiting any buildings in that area to 2 stories, limiting buildings in that area to no more than 30 units. So you could have portions of the building, of various buildings in that area, but no more than 30 total units. So it kind of helps to limit the amount of development in that next 100 feet. So those are the types of things when we're talking about building massing. They've also offered a site-wide condition to limit all buildings to no more than 22 units. So that just helps to break things up a little bit. You're not going to have massive 100-unit buildings on the site. They're going to be sort of in these smaller buildings. So when we're talking about massing being one of the strategies for making those context-sensitive transitions, those are a couple of the things that they've added to speak to that.
I see. And then is there a limit on the height of the buildings and the rest of the development?
Right now, it would default to RMF zoning, so there's a maximum height of 35 feet, with the caveat that you can go an additional foot in height for each additional foot of setback that you're meeting. So it
And
could
what
be a
is-
little higher than 35 in some places.
What does that translate to in terms of typical stories?
It would probably be 2 to 3.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions.
I've got a few for staff. The currently zoned R40, did I read correctly that before they could build anything, they have to come in and get it rezoned?
That's right, unless they wanted to develop under the existing zoning of R40 today, which really doesn't permit much beyond those large acre lots.
And did I read where that road is not going to be opened up to 5 lanes for 20 years? Is that what I saw that?
It may depend on development. Right now, the way that we get our roads widened and improved is predominantly as development occurs. I do not believe there is a project planned for Old Apex currently.
Gotcha. And then lastly, and I should have looked this up on my own, do we have a definition for what is high density in the plan?
That's actually a good question. I can double check whether we have a definition of high density in the plan. We don't in our LDO, so it doesn't differentiate, it just has multifamily, it doesn't differentiate
Gotcha.
between the units per
Thank
acre.
you.
Good. John?
I have a few questions. First is for staff. With regards to the 100-foot building setback and structures being constructed in it, would the prohibition on structures also apply to retaining walls, or would retaining walls be allowed within the setback?
I believe we would interpret that retaining walls could be allowed there, especially knowing that there may be some topo and grading challenges with having to construct the greenway and things of that nature. I don't believe we would interpret that those would be subject to that restriction as well.
Okay. And second question is also for staff, and again, with the western transition, the Greenway Trail, it looks, can overlap the perimeter buffer, the actual landscape buffer.
That is correct.
At what point is it determined in the process where the actual trail itself lands within that perimeter buffer?
That would be determined at time of development plan. It could cross through, meander through the buffer. It could be located entirely in the buffer, entirely outside. It might depend on topography, grading challenges, things of that nature, that it's just too early to know. But to your point, it can fully overlap with the perimeter buffer.
Okay. And in cases where it does overlap, is there any additional planning that's required to mitigate that cleared strip within the buffer, or how does that work?
Yes. So if they have to clear out any portion of the buffer, in an ideal world, it would remain undisturbed. What we
Right.
know with the Greenway construction, portions of it at least would be cleared out. They do have to then replant to that type A standard. And they could, depending on how the trail meanders, they can fit it anywhere within that buffer. They could even offer additional buffer width in certain areas to be able to fit the type A plantings, as long as they can find a way to fit the type A buffer, which is part of why staff encourage the 50-foot buffer as opposed to the LDO default of 40, because that already gives them a little extra space to fit it into if the entire greenway easement ends up overlapping into it.
Gotcha. So functionally, you may wind up with denser plantings in certain areas
You
to
could.
mitigate for the cleared corridor.
There are certain spacing requirements in a type A buffer, so it can't be so clustered that you have big gaps. There needs to be some kind of visual screen between them and the Triangle Forest neighborhood. But yes, you could strategically, to get the trail and the easement to fit, kind of plant around as needed.
Okay. And my last question is for the applicant, and I apologize for making you keep coming down here, but with regards to the buffer determinations on the streams, I know you mentioned the pond, but if you said it, I missed it. Is there a jurisdictional buffer on the stream that runs along the blue line that runs along the western property line?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention it in my comments. But yeah, on the northern part of the western boundary, there is a stream and there will be a riparian buffer there. And so I think probably almost half, maybe a little less than half of that western property line on the north side of it will be an undisturbed area.
Okay, and that's in addition to the 60-foot, or that's in addition to the planting buffer? It would fall outside of that?
No, it's all within the 200 feet that we've been working off of, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. That's it.
Mike?
A question for Aaron. I just wanted to follow up on the height question that Mary Jo Hill had.
Yes.
You mentioned that outside of that setback, you can gain an additional foot in height for every foot you're away from the setback. Is there no limit to that?
There's no limit other than the site itself. You'll start to get so far
Sure.
interior that,
Sure.
you won't be able to go up after a certain.
So a follow-up question for the applicant. And knowing that without an additional condition or something in the motion that, we could pass our concern on to town council, that there's not a specific way for us to hold you to a specific promise. But if we were to pick a number and say yes or no, we agree that that is, according to the community plan, that we think that would work. How much height do you need?
I think based on, I mentioned earlier, we're working on wrapping up a project at Cary Parkway and Evans, and we're using a similar building type. And I think our tallest building there is probably at or about the 35-foot limit that we have here. So I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't know, we haven't really have fully designed building plans. I can tell you that majority of our buildings currently that we're working off of are just 2 stories. We might have some 3-story buildings in there, or stepped buildings, 2- and 3-story buildings. And so I couldn't give you an answer off the top of my head. If you guys have a specific request, we're happy to analyze it and get back to you with a commitment, but I just don't know right now.
But you're thinking maximum of 3 stories?
Maximum of 3 stories, certainly, yeah.
That's all I got.
Thank you, Chris.
Going back to the stream and that western property line, couple questions. One, I guess, is on slide 19, some of the changes since the public hearing. One was saying it's been revised to 100-foot setback and 200-foot massing restrictions from western property line. What were the original numbers before it was revised? How much were those increased?
There was initially not a setback or the additional 200-foot massing restriction, so it would have just been the 50-foot type A buffer, which was committed to at the public hearing.
Right.
And then we do also have, there's a 10-foot building setback off of a buffer that has mature vegetation, so they're essentially taking that 10 and adding another 40
Okay.
for that 100-foot setback.
And then if the stream that runs north-south along that western property line, I think I heard you say that about half of it was jurisdictional.
I think a little less than half probably.
And then just measuring it off of GIS, it almost looks like the center of that stream is only about 100 feet from the property line. So is there it doesn't seem like there's even room to build any type of structures in that would front on a road. Is there plans for homes to be immediately adjacent to that perimeter buffer?
Yeah, I mean, after we've, this is, I think this map on here is based off of GIS, and so when we had it out there actually flagged, it's, the blue line that kind of goes further south is actually further up in the site, and so really on the southern part of that, southwestern part of the site, you have, I think our current concept shows about 3 buildings in that location.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was more referring to, I guess, as you move northward,
Yeah.
it seems that most of that stream is within about 120 feet of the property line.
Sure, yeah.
Up there, would you anticipate any homes in that area?
No, nothing in that area.
So I guess if there's not a plan to have any homes in that area, is there any reason why that buffer, if it's already going to be jurisdictional, is there any reason why the type A width can't be increased, at least along the portions of those adjoining owners that are in that section of the stream?
Yeah, I mean, we could. I mean, we're already going to be subject, I think, to the riparian buffer, which is why we didn't, further. I think that'll just add another layer to the conditions, which we can do.
Right.
But yeah, we'll look into that.
I think that would seems to address a lot of the concerns and emails that I've seen.
Yeah.
And it seems like if there's a jurisdictional stream in that area, it seems like a request that doesn't seem unreasonable and wouldn't be hard to address and negatively impacting the rest of the development.
Okay.
So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
That's all the questions I have.
Sean?
Thank you very much. Aaron, question with kind of, second and third order effects. If this gets rezoned and they don't get the trapezoid area to get the second angle, what happens next? What happens to these properties and these concerns? Because that seems to be a major hinge point of the rezoning, is to ensure that second access. So what are those second and third order fallouts if that does not happen?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I might actually let the applicant speak to that in a minute if he has any updates for us on that additional piece of property. I think the short answer is it would technically have a zoning entitlement. What would happen, though, is that once they hit that 99 or 100 units, from an LDO perspective, you couldn't build anymore until you had a second point of access. So there might be something that could be built on the site if they did get rezoned and then for some reason the deal with the northern property fell through, but it would not be to the extent that's being proposed with this rezoning. And I don't know if Mr. Grewal can add some additional context to that piece.
We're still under contract on that property and plan to purchase it, yeah. And the property owner, go egg his house or something, yeah.
I was like, don't put that out, no. With that, looking at the streams, though, that property is also, it looks like another possibly jurisdictional, is that going to be a problem for that development with the stream right there? Because there's a stream that, it appears that there's a stream buffer that they're going to have to build the bridge over, and I don't know if that is any sort of issue or not.
Again, they would have to get the correct permissions to have any impact to that buffer, if indeed it does exist as shown today. Sometimes these buffers end up changing in the field from what we show on our GIS maps, but they would have to get all of the appropriate permissions in order to impact it, if it is there.
Thank you.
Jim, you good?
No further questions.
Any other questions?
Well, just to follow up on that, if, you know, you could build in stages at 100 and whether or not you get the northern property, but two things. One is the town of Cary would have no say in whether or not, that's all other organizations, state or federal or whomever, as far as building access out to Maynard Road from that northern property, correct?
As far as crossing the stream buffer goes, that would be,
Right.
yes, outside
The
of our
key component of
jurisdiction.
actually getting there. But the bigger question is, from your standpoint, I mean, I would assume you don't want to build 100 and sit tight. So, I mean, your goal is, you mentioned you're under contract. Timing, just expectations, moving forward, construction, would you start construction prior to closing on that? Just kind of understanding your thought process.
Our plan is to do it all at once. That's our
Okay.
plan, and that's
Thank
what it's been from the jump.
Got you. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank the board for having so many insightful questions this evening. Because of that, I actually do not have any questions, so I thank everyone for their questions. It's a shocker, but again, I thank everyone for showing such a high level of interest in this case and getting so many good points out that I think we all had questions in our mind on. So having said that, would someone like to make a motion for 21 REZ 16 Old Apex Road rezoning? The wording is up on your screen.
Sure, I will. I move the board find case number 21 REZ 16 is not consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the P&Z board.
Thank you. Would someone like to second that?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Don. You.
I'll preface it with, I'm not doubting that it's going to be an amazing building. My folks live at Walton Woods, and it's a very nice community. I'm sure it'll be the same. And while I have a handful of concerns, I'll just focus strictly on the community plan. The Heritage Neighborhood supports multifamily, but in the shape policy, we're supposed to focus high density in strategic locations, and the Heritage Neighborhood is not listed as one. And then I don't think it'll maintain the neighborhood character with the stuff around it, for my reasons.
Thanks. John.
As I look at this, I see this as a balancing act between providing more housing choices in neighborhoods, which it certainly does, and also the providing good transitions. And I think that the applicant has made a good run in that direction. For me, this comes down to uncertainty, especially as we look at the transitions and the potential for retaining walls and grading. And as I look at the number of elements that overlap on that transition buffer with greenway, required landscaping buffer, the potential for grading. On the northern portion, I see that accomplished really well with the additional stream buffer and the width that's there. But as I get into the southern portion, I see a lot of opportunity there for that transition to not be over and above and meeting the requirements of the policies. So that's where I am. I don't see this as something that couldn't be made to work, but I don't have the information in front of me today to say, yes, the transitions are met.
Thanks. Any comments down here, Jeff? Okay, any?
No, I mean, I tend to agree conceptually that what you're trying to accomplish makes a lot of sense, and I think, you know, a lot of the accommodations make a lot of sense, but there are still no site plans. There's just a lot of ambiguity around, you know, a piece of property that needs to be purchased in order to accommodate the plan. So I do see where some of the vagaries around the plan could create some, you know, some uncertainty.
Okay. Andy?
No additional comments?
Mary Jo, comment?
My concerns are mostly in the SERV policies, where there's a lot of talk about restoring open space and natural environment, improving energy efficiencies and sustainable energy practices and air quality, but you've got a whole lot of tree just driving down that road, and there's a lot of density of trees, even though they're small ones, but it looks like obviously those are going to have to be taken down in order to provide for this development to be happening. And I know that's probably a large concern of the neighboring community, because that just obviously, by its definition, takes away their privacy. So I question whether those SERV policies are legitimate justification for this particular development.
Thank you. Mike, any comments?
Initially, my only concern was building height. The applicant provided a lot of proposed zoning conditions, and I think that is excellent. And they went above and beyond on a number of things that were asked of them. I think there's some vagueness to the proposed condition number 2, that any additional units shall be buildings of 3 stories or more without any specific limit. And I think that would have been helpful to really understand or get a good picture of how this serves the shape criteria. I think that there's a lot of great specificity otherwise, except for the fact that it's really difficult to visualize this without any other information. I definitely want to see something built here. I definitely would love to see this project be built. I would encourage the applicant to, on their next time through, or if they go to council, to show as much as you possibly can. That's it.
Thank Chris, any comments?
Really just the same as I had talked to before. I think that, and I agree, it's very hard to understand some of these rezonings without a site plan and trying to understand how things are going to get built out along these transitions. And I still feel like the western boundary buffer width is something that could have been looked at that wasn't included here. And I hear the applicant said that they could look into it. But that is a concern. I think most of the other items that were added were positive benefits, but certainly a concern.
Thanks. John, any comments?
No additional comments.
Okay, thank you. Again, very good comments from the board. I would like to thank the applicant for all the changes that they've made since this was originally proposed. I think a huge step forward. You know, increasing the buffer, trying to adjust the height. I think all that is very helpful in addressing this. And I think what I'm really hearing from the board, and it's the thoughts I have as well, is while there's been great progress, there's probably some more work to do to get some of the unknowns known. And I am sure by the time it reaches the town council, who will make the final decision, that a lot of that will be able to be worked out. And the opinions that we put forward are really citizen comments and opinions based on what we view the the Cary Community Plan to be and how we would feel about implementing it on that basis alone. So having said that, we'll now take a vote, and if you vote aye, you are voting that this is not consistent. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yes.
So having said that, all in favor of the motion is put forward, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. That is carried unanimously, that they would find it not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Thank you for everyone. Okay, let's move on to our next case. Our next case is Act 28 Land Development Ordinance Amendments. These are text amendments, and Katie Dry, Assistant Planning Director, will share the staff's presentation. There is not an applicant for this. All board members will have the opportunity to ask questions of the staff following the presentation.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Board. For your consideration are Act 28 amendments to the Land Development Ordinance. These amendments fall into the incremental change supporting major plan initiative categories, as well as the process improvements and technical clarifications category. All proposed items fall within Chapter 9 of the Land Development Ordinance, which regulates signs. Cary staff issues nearly 300 sign permits per year and handles hundreds more sign inquiries from sign contractors and businesses. Cary sign ordinance is designed to promote a sign owner's needs while balancing aesthetic interests of the community and regulating the adverse impact of signs. Act 28 proposes amendments to Cary's sign ordinance in two areas. Item A, we're proposing to add sign standards for mixed-use buildings, and item B is proposed process improvements and clarifications to the existing sign ordinance. The Imagine Cary Community Plan maintains and enhances the core qualities that make Cary an attractive and inviting community, while also providing strategic opportunities for developments where Cary residents can live, work, and play within vibrant environments. Cary's vision establishes that higher density mixed-use developments will be located within destination centers, commercial mixed-use centers, Cary's town center, and other centers as designated on the Future Growth Framework map, which is found within the SHAPE chapter. A few recent examples of mixed-use developments include the Fenton, the Meridian, and the One Walker, One Walnut development downtown. Cary's sign ordinance regulates an update to its standards to permit signage for mixed-use buildings. In this example, Cary's regulations allow building signage based on the linear frontage of a building or a tenant space. The size of this sign is then established based on the length of the linear frontage. This approach for regulating signs works well for single-story developments, but presents a challenge when applying the regulations to upper stories of vertically mixed-use buildings. So in this example to the right, if we were to apply our current regulations, the ground floor tenants would be permitted to have signs, however, the upper floor tenants would not. The proposed changes to vertically mixed-use buildings would allow one wall sign per facade along upper level floors in addition to the already permitted ground floor tenant signage. The sign criteria will follow the same process for ground floor tenants where we will measure the linear frontage of the building. The second component of this amendment is to increase the allowable size and location criteria for projecting signs. These are also sometimes called blade signs. Cary's current regulations allow for projecting signs under certain criteria. For example, Cary's current regulations allow for projecting signs in the town center when located along pedestrian walkways with a maximum size of 6 square feet as seen in this example. Act 28 LDO amendments are proposed to allow for mixed-use buildings to incorporate larger projecting signs up to 45 square feet as seen in these examples to the right. The second part of the Act 28 amendments are found in item B. These are all classified as process improvements and technical clarifications. The intent of this section is to clarify certain sections of the ordinance text which have been difficult to understand and/or enforce in practice. These items: updating color and illumination standards and streamlining submittal paperwork for logos for signs. Also streamlining language for vehicle-oriented directional signage, and clarifying sign area requirements for veranda signs. We're also proposing to streamline the process for monument signs. Cary's current ordinance requires the location of a monument sign to be shown on the development plan, and staff has found that we can also verify the location of this type of sign using other means in addition to a development plan, which could include a survey or a plat. Staff would still review all other sign criteria for monument signs, such as the size, the materials, color, lighting, landscaping, things like that. This item was heard by council on September 22nd of this year for a public hearing. Council shared feedback regarding item B3 of this report, which was clarifying sign area for signs within the town center. There was concern with the unintended consequences from removing a correlation between wall signs and ground signs in the town center. And since that time, staff has removed this item from the proposed LDO amendments to study further, and we anticipate that this item will be brought back at a later date for consideration by council as well as the Planning and Zoning Board. So how do these act amendments relate to the Imagine Cary Community Plan? We find that implementation of the community plan calls for vertically mixed-use buildings in key areas of Cary, including the downtown special planning area, as well as others. The amendment will add criteria for vertically mixed-use buildings to install signage. Act 28 also provides further technical clarifications to improve our regulatory process for signs, keeping us on strong legal footing as we implement the plan. Therefore, staff finds the Act 28 amendments to be consistent with the intent of the plan and recommends approval. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. The board will now ask any questions of staff, and we'll start down on the right. Sean?
No questions.
Chris?
No questions.
Mike?
No questions.
No questions.
No questions.
No questions.
Jeff?
I have a question, but it's basically about my lack of kind of understanding in general. When we sought out as a community, and we have a very, well-planned community, I'm an outsider and I come in, it's hard to find your way and to see things. So strategically, I guess that's really my question is ultimately, these are inside of areas that are already kind of buffered and they're already contained. So these signs really allow you to migrate better within whatever the community is, rather than changing holistically our approach to signs. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think so. We are not changing entirely our approach to signs. We're just adding in criteria to allow permitting for vertically mixed-use buildings, and we are seeing more vertically mixed-use buildings since the adoption of the Cary Community Plan, but in strategic locations. So you're going to see it in downtown, in the Eastern Cary Gateway, and these are areas where it's going to be developed to be a little bit more urban. The buffers may not be as great, and so these buildings just require a different approach to signage, and updating the sign ordinance we're finding is necessary as we're getting more buildings in.
Gotcha. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I just thought it'd be helpful to get that clarification.
Good. Could you look at slide 28 again? I just want to make sure I understand. So I agree with what you're saying. Everything's going to go up. And now that we have mixed with multi-commercial tenants as well as multi-housing all in a same tall building. So in this example on the right, if you've got multi-ground level tenants, and theoretically, you could also have other commercial tenants on a second floor or a third floor. So would that be still a traditional monument sign, or are you saying that they can stack building signs?
Yeah, so on this example to the right that we're looking at, it would provide some additional options for wall signs, signs that would be mounted to the wall. So the way our ordinance current reads is each of the tenants along the ground floor, if they've got a customer-facing entrance where you can walk in off the street, we look at that tenant space, the size of it, the length, and we permit a sign based on each tenant space. And in this example, we've got, you could have an office that's renting some of the upper level floors or additional commercial spaces, and our current ordinance would not allow them to have additional signage. This proposal would allow for them to have one additional sign on the upper level floors in addition to the
Okay,
ground.
one.
Yes.
One additional sign.
That's correct. One per
Okay,
facade.
that's
So
what I
you
was-
have one facing
okay.
the street and then one on another street.
Okay, very good, because theoretically, you could have a retail on the ground floor, and I'm making this up, professional services companies above them. But they would not have rights to individual signage. It would still be one high, monuments below, possibly.
Yeah, so individual tenants on the ground floor could each have a sign and then one on the upper level. And then in practice, this building would also need to develop a master sign plan as it's being built and before tenants are moving in. And that would identify where the signage can be placed on the building. So we would work with the developer ahead of time to kind of identify that, that signage area. But the change in this ordinance would allow us to have that conversation and develop the master sign plan with the developer for the site.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Any other questions?
Just a quick follow-up
Yeah, go
to that
ahead.
is just, the obvious is when there's multiple tenants on the top floor, how do you decide who gets the sign?
They have to work amongst
Arm
themselves to
wrestle.
decide. who gets the site. Yes.
Negotiate.
That's
Great
when
question.
the landlord,
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, it says upper floor tenants. I mean, these are literally upper floor tenants, or could a tenant on the second floor have signage on the upper floor?
Technically, a tenant on the second floor could take that upper floor
Okay.
tenant. We,
So it's not only to the top floor, it's a number of signs that are limited.
so there would be one sign that would be allowed per facade for those upper floor tenants. We as Cary staff would not really have any input on who gets the sign. They would just need to work amongst themselves.
Gotcha.
To get the
Yeah,
rights to the sign.
Thanks, yeah, just for clarification, thank you.
any other? Okay, would someone like to make a motion for Act 28 Land Development Ordinance amendments?
I'll make a motion that I move that the board find Act 28 amendments to the Land Development Ordinance to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Would someone like to second?
Second.
Thank you. Andy, any comments?
No, I mean, I think everything's very straightforward and makes all the sense in the world, and I support all the recommendations 100%.
Jeff, comments?
No, I agree wholeheartedly, thank you.
Any other comments from board members? The only thing I'd like to say is, I know people talk about Cary's sign rules, but I promise you, if you go anywhere, other communities that have no zoning, you will see how wonderful our zoning really helps make our community so much better. So I know it can be a battle for you guys, but in the long run, I think our whole community wins out.
Can
I
touch on
agree.
that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Funny it says that. I grew up in Fayetteville. Love my town, but if you go through downtown Fayetteville, they need this.
It's something, yeah.
Too late.
Yeah.
It's rough. Any other comments?
I have one
Yeah, go
question,
ahead.
and this is for Matt. When we're going to vote, and we've been doing a all in favor aye, all in favor nay.
Correct.
How does one abstain from that vote?
Can't really. Abstention is a vote in favor based on the board rules. So if you are not in favor of something, you gotta say nay. Otherwise, it's counted as a yes.
It counts as a yes or a no?
It counts as a yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just to piggyback on what Jeff mentioned about, you know, maybe having less of a background in signage. You know, I do development for a living, and I have no idea if 1.5 square feet for each linear foot of building frontage is consistent with the work chapter, section 6. I have no idea.
Well, and that's where your citizen
and-
opinion comes in.
Right.
You know, you're not really required to, none of us
Be a professional.
are required to do that, but all of us have certain skills that we bring to the table. So it very well can boil down to your opinion and how you view it without going any deeper than that, if that helps.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Having said that, all in favor of the motion that's been put forward, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Nay, Mike Rosselli.
That's fine. So approves with one dissent. Okay, we actually do have one bit of new business, and that is the 2023 calendar. It was in the, I think everyone's seen it. I don't think we have it to show, but basically, there's not really anything that we're going to go any detail on. It was only on there in case someone caught some date that they just weren't comfortable with. But there's nothing to vote on. It's just really any comments on it. Any? No? Okay, having said that, I don't think we have any issues with the calendar as it's been presented and approved by, I guess it'll be approved by the council at some point in time. Okay, that's all the items we have on the agenda for this evening. Thank you everyone for coming, and with that, we will close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.